it's because I can't see the screen with my varifocal glasses. So I'm going to sort of keep leaning towards you like that, looking slightly mad, and then leaning back like that, anyway, because otherwise I can't see the screen. Anyway, so tonight, as Bodhinaga said, we're starting a new theme. So ever since the beginning of lockdown, our theme has been Dharma for difficult times. But now we're leaving that behind, or we're sort of leaving it behind, because the difficult times haven't ended. And all Dharma is Dharma for difficult times. If it doesn't help us in difficult times, it's not really Dharma. So what we will be exploring for the next few months is also Dharma for difficult times, but with a different name. And we've called our new theme, as Bodhinaga said, Life, but Not As We Know It. It's about how we change our life from something ordinary and probably not very satisfying into something extraordinary that will give us real fulfillment and satisfaction. And as we follow our theme, we will be following a well-known Dharmic formulation, a list, in fact. But we are not going to tell you what it is. You have to guess. So in these Sangha Nights, we always follow a coherent, connected, progressive theme. So the talks and discussions build on each other, lead us forward. They're not just miscellaneous. And we put quite a lot of effort into that, into making sure that the talks link up one to another, that they follow on from each other, they build on each other, so that what we get is something that really hangs together. And this theme will be absolutely no different. We're going to take a well-known Dharmic formulation and come at it from a slightly different angle to the one you're used to. And then you have to guess what it is. Now, I haven't checked this with the centre team, so I'm taking a risk here. I'm taking a risk here, and that is that I thought to make this a bit fairer, we ought to have categories. We ought to organise the guessing into different categories, a bit like a race where you have, young people and middle-aged people and old people. So there'll be one category for order members, one category for people training for ordination, one category for mitras who aren't yet training for ordination, one category for people who are not yet mitras, and one category for people who attended our introductory course just before lockdown. So send in your answers by email to the centre, and the winner of each category will get absolutely nothing. You may, if you're lucky, get your name mentioned as and when and if we ever decide to announce what the actual theme is, what the Dharmic list is. So for the time being, we're just calling this series Life, but Not As We Know It. Life, but not the ordinary life that is all too often routine and dull and humdrum, and never seems to quite give us what we want, never seems to satisfy our deepest longings. So life, but not normal life as we know it. How can we live an extraordinary life that really does fulfill us? So Shantideva, the 8th century Indian author of the very famous text, the Bodhicharya Avatara, the guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life, uses the analogy of the philosopher's stone of the alchemists to bring out the way the Dharma can transform our life, transform our being, in fact. So the philosopher's stone, of course, was the sort of mythical gem that was sought after by the alchemists, which would transmute base metals into gold. It could transmute base metals like dull lead and rusty iron into bright, shining gold. And we could use that analogy to describe what this series of Sangha Nights is all about. How do we transform the base metal, if you like, of a life as normally lived into gold, into pure gold? How do we transform our life from something that is all too often a bit dull and leaden or rusty and iron-like into something bright, beautiful, valuable and weighty like gold? How do we transform ourselves into something bright and weighty? So that's what the series is all about. So as I said, that's the title of the series, and the title of this first talk in the series that I'm giving tonight is Seeing Through Different Eyes, I think, I hope. Now the Buddha was said to have several different sorts of eyes, not physically, of course, but in terms of the way he saw and what he saw. So like this. He saw not just with the ordinary physical eye, but with the worldly eye, not with the worldly eye that sees things the way worldly society sees them, but also with the Buddha eye and the Dharma eye, which sees things quite differently. So first illustration, please. Ta-da! The Buddha eye. Slightly new agey Buddha eye with the tree and the Buddha. So yeah, the Buddha saw with the Buddha eye, with the Dharma eye, as well as with the physical eye, and as well as with, if you like, the worldly eye that sees things the way worldly society sees things. And we also have the potential to have a different sort of eye. A sort of eye that sees the world, or a pair of eyes that sees the world in quite a different way. With our normal worldly eyes, the eyes we've been trained to use since childhood, we see some things as beautiful and other things as ugly. And quite naturally, we want to move towards the things that look beautiful to those eyes. And we want to move away from the things that look ugly to those eyes. We don't want those things in our life. And with these normal worldly eyes, we tend to see things like money and possessions and financial security, nice clothes, sensory pleasures, nice food and holidays, and worldly success and entertainment and status and popularity. These things look really beautiful and gorgeous to our worldly eyes. They look attractive, so we want to move towards them. We want more of them. Whereas things like simplicity of life, lack of worldly status, any form of renunciation, courting disapproval by living outside the norm that society lays down, doing things that bring no worldly reward whatsoever, all these things look rather ugly to our worldly eyes, and we want none of them. We want to avoid them. So yeah, we move towards what we see as beautiful and away from what we see as ugly. So the way we see determines the way we live our life. And the sort of eyes we use to look at the world determine the way we see. They determine what we see as beautiful and what we see as ugly. If we see with different eyes, we live a different sort of life. And we all have the potential to see through quite different eyes. We have the potential to see through the eyes of our spiritual potential, our potential for Buddhahood, what some people like to call our Buddha nature, the eyes of our higher self, if you like. And we all have glimpses at least of the way the world looks through those eyes, through those other eyes. Or we wouldn't be here. We just wouldn't be here if we didn't have those glimpses. We've all had glimpses of a different sort of beauty and a different idea of what might be ugly. Because through those new eyes, things look very different. Many of the things that looked beautiful before to our worldly eyes now look a bit shabby. Like a life lived just for personal security or pleasure or consumption, a life with no higher meaning, which might look very attractive if it was dressed up well to our worldly eyes, they look a bit shabby to these other eyes. And some of the things that looked ugly to our worldly eyes, like a simple life, With our new eyes, they look comely and fitting in the way that a spacious, simply furnished room looks more comely and pleasing than a room that's stuffed with furniture and knickknacks. And through these new eyes, we maybe also begin to see a new beauty that we have never seen before, that we did not previously know that existed, that our worldly eyes just simply don't see, don't pick up. So now, with these new eyes at least a little bit open, and hopefully with some better specs on than I've got, we want to move. We want to move forwards towards this new beauty that we see, and away from some of the things that looked good to our old eyes, but now seem a bit shabby. So we move towards different things, we move away from different things, so we begin to live a different sort of life. Seeing through different eyes is the start to living a different life and becoming a different, more fulfilled being. And as I've said, we've all had glimpses of the world through these new eyes. But how do we get them to open more consistently? And how do we get the sort of dust out of them? We're not used to using them. They've been closed for a long time. How do we get the dust out of them so that we improve our eyesight? Well, many of the ways that we do that are hardly dharmic rocket science. You've heard them all before. Because in many ways, this is just what a Dharma life is about. It's about how we open those eyes. It's what a Dharma life is designed to do. What do? We meditate. We meditate, and sometimes we manage to dwell for a while in a higher realm of a higher sort of beauty. We study the Dharma and let it soak into our being so that we begin more and more to see the world through those Dharma eyes. And we spend time with Sangha friends because this different way of seeing is contagious. We catch it. It's contagious in a good way. We catch it if we're around people who see the world this way. So dharmically, we do not want to socially distance ourselves. We want to catch it. So we talk about all those things. We talk about meditation. We do Dharma study. We talk a lot about Sangha contact, etc., and the value of Sangha. And that's what this Sangha Night is all about, how we can get some of that during lockdown. So what I want to talk about is something a little bit different. What I'd like to talk about is how we can learn to appreciate more and more the different sort of beauty that we see through those new eyes. Because the more we appreciate this beauty, the more we will want to open our eyes to it, our new eyes to it. And the more we open our eyes to it, the more we'll love it. And the more we love it, the more we will quite naturally move towards it. Quite naturally live in a way that, that moves us towards it, bring it more and more into our life. So I'd like to do that under, basically two major headings. And firstly, I'd like to talk about how we can see more the beauty of virtue, how we can use these new eyes to see the beauty of virtue so that we begin to love virtue and want to move towards it. And secondly, how can we use these new eyes, open them more to see the beauty of reality so that we move more towards what is real and true. Okay, so firstly, how do we use our new eyes, if you like, how do we learn to see more the beauty of virtue? How do we learn to love virtue so that we move towards it and quite naturally bring it into our life? Well, in the way that the word virtue is often used today, it's come to mean a rather sort of wishy-washy quality that's often got a lot to do with, say, sexual abstinence. So she lost her virtue or something like that. Or an unthreatening sort of niceness and respectability. But the original meaning of virtue, of the word virtue, was a lot heftier than that. Our word virtue is closely connected in its roots to the Sanskrit word virya, which of course many of us will know means energy for the good. So virtue was a a quality associated with the warrior for the good, with the knight at their best, the knight with a K at their best, the warrior for the good. So yes, it included ethical purity, uprightness, compassion, concern for the less privileged, concern for the downtrodden, altruism. But it also included the strength and the courage needed to make those qualities real and effective. Because if we lack strength and courage, then when times are hard and we feel threatened, we'll fall back into fear and anxiety and concern just for ourselves. Mere niceness dissolves the minute things get difficult. Without strength and courage, when times are hard, as I say, we're concerned with ourselves, we have nothing left over to give to others. And this real virtue, this virtue of the sort that I'm talking about, it can, usually does, and certainly would have in the past, be seen as including a sense of honor, in the sense of skillful pride, skillful pride. So again, talking about Shantideva, this 8th century author of the Bodhicharyavatara, Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life that I talked about earlier, according to him, we can use this skillful pride, what he calls skillful pride, to as a way into a love of virtue, as a way of really wanting virtue, loving virtue. Because we all want to feel good about ourselves. We all want a sense of self-esteem. But all too often we feel good about ourselves. We try to feel good about ourselves for things that don't matter to us, don't matter really, like worldly success or status or popularity or our ability, our education and our ability to talk really well, or even our good looks, or even our sort of the way people we don't even respect look like us. So these, I mean, what's the point of any of those? Don't really make us feel good about ourselves. But if we can feel about ourselves for things that really do matter, if we can feel good about ourselves for being a strong, large-hearted human being, that gives us a sense of what Shantideva in his text calls sthama, S-T-H-A-M-A, which literally, I believe, means seat. It's seat almost in the sense of a throne. It's where we sit. It's where a noble man or a noble woman sits. So we can transform our natural desire for self-esteem, our natural desire to feel good about ourselves into a love of this quality of virtue, which includes this sense of nobility, of our own nobility, a sense of honor, large-heartedness, this skillful pride. We can see ourselves as too big to be small, too large-hearted to behave in a way that's mean or small or dishonest or sneaky. So going back to my alchemical analogy, virtue of this sort is like the gold that the philosopher's stone creates from the base metal of ordinary pride, which all too often is fragile, arrogant, brittle, comes from a lack of a sense of self-esteem, real, genuine self-esteem. But this pride, this dhamma, this skillful pride, it's this sort of sense of pride in our own virtue. It is pure and bright, but also weighty, able to bring riches and abundance into the world. So this sort of virtue is as beautiful as gold. It's something we can love, so that we want to move towards it. We want it for ourselves. We want to bring it into our life. And when we do that, our life begins to be transformed. Our life begins to be transformed from base metal into gold. So, as well as seeing the beauty of virtue, the second thing I want to talk about is learning to use our new eyes to see the beauty of reality, of truth. Getting the dust out of our eyes so that we can begin to see this more and more clearly. And I think when it comes to this, when it comes to seeing the beauty of reality, so that we love reality, want to move towards the truth, for many of us, a good place to start is in learning more and more to see the beauty of the natural world. It's an accessible place to start. Somehow, the beauty of reality that's behind the surface world that we see, it shines through the beauty of natural things. Frequently, it glimmers all over the place, shimmers behind the world that we see, a bit like sunlight shining through a rather dirty window. So we can exercise our new eyes, if you like, give them, strengthen them, get them a bit clearer by giving ourselves the opportunity, the time, the space to really stop and look and listen, to get out of the world of the unreal world of mental chatter in which we often live, so that we can get our attention out there on what is real. To look through the dirty glass of the surface world and get a sense of that light that's shining from beyond it. So meditation, of course, is a great help in this. Many people over the years, I've experienced it to some extent myself, and I've heard many people say it, that when we start to meditate, suddenly the world starts to look different. We hardly noticed it. We'd stopped noticing it. We just lived in this sort of diagram. And then we start meditating and the world suddenly sort of just looks so much brighter, so much more vivid, so much more beautiful. And that is telling us something. That's telling us something about the nature of reality. When we meditate more, we're in a better space. We're in a better mental state. When we're in a better mental state, we see the world more clearly. When we see the world more clearly, we see it as more beautiful. We see beauty everywhere. So meditation is a great help in seeing the beauty of the natural world. But we also need to give ourselves time and space. We can't rush from a world of business and busyness and constant input and expect to go out and appreciate the beauty of the world against some sort of time schedule. You know, I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes appreciating the beauty of the world, and then I've got to get on with something important. That it's not going to work like that. We need to give ourselves quite a lot of time. We need to allow the prapancha, the mental proliferation, the mental constructs to just settle down a bit. And that is one of the positives that's come out of lockdown for many, many people, for myself as well, for many, many people, is a slowing down that's allowed us to notice the world more clearly, to see the world more clearly, to notice the beauty that is there, that's shining through reality, rather than being lost in our own thought constructions, our prapancha and our busyness, our mental proliferation. So, of course, with our worldly eyes, spending time doing nothing is just a waste of time. It's a waste of time. We should be doing something useful. So to see this beauty, we need to shift from what Sangha calls the utilitarian to the aesthetic mode. So not looking at the world to see how it can serve our agendas, serve our desires, but just looking at the world to see its beauty for its own sake. And he tells a story about that. He tells a story about his time in Kalimpong, where he said to somebody, "Look at that tree, isn't it beautiful?" And the person he said it to said, "Yes, there's enough firewood there to last all winter." So that sort of illustrates the difference between the aesthetic and the utilitarian mode, if you like. So if we allow it, and especially if we meditate, and if we take the time to spend time alone, particularly alone in nature, the glimpse of the reality behind things that we get from natural beauty can transform, will transform, does transform into a sense of reverence, a desire almost to bow to go down on our knees in front of something so awesome. And this is a completely appropriate response. It's one of the emotional equivalents of getting even a slight glimpse of the beauty of reality. So in the Gaurava Sutta, the discourse on reverence, we see the Buddha shortly after his enlightenment expressing just this sense of reverence for the nature of things, for the way things are. The Buddha too experienced this reverence. This reverence is an aspect of the enlightened mind, the mind that sees with new eyes and sees the beauty and wonder of reality. And this reverence is a form of love. It's love for something that we recognize as not just awesomely beautiful, but also awesomely larger and more important than our own small self, but which in a funny sort of sense we're also part of. So this reverence, so when we experience this love, we quite naturally want to align ourselves more and more with this beauty. We want to express it, express reality, express that beauty in the way that we live. So it's really worth just opening our eyes to it, developing the faculty that perceives it, which is part of these new eyes that we wish to open. And of course, natural beauty is not the only form of beauty that there is. The beauty of reality can sometimes almost also shine through human creations. It can shine through great art, or even quite good art, through architecture, through great music. Even, I think, through some things, so some human creations that we don't usually dignify with the term art. I think I partly became a Buddhist because of being completely transported by an exhibition of Japanese ceramic, which just seemed to speak of the expansiveness of meditation and of a beauty that I couldn't quite put my finger on. So human creation can also convey something of this beauty of the nature of reality. So learning to appreciate art, to open up to the beauty of reality that can sometimes express itself through art, opening up to new forms of art, new types of art, new genre that we haven't experienced before, is a way that we can exercise these new eyes so that they can see more clearly. And of course, not all art is an expression of any sort of reality. Some art is more about concepts and hype and marketing, or what can be talked about by critics and academics, than it is about expressing any sort of beauty or reality. So that doesn't mean we need to become art cognoscenti or think that everything that calls itself art is art and we should go down on our knees to it. But taking the time to open up to new forms of art that we maybe haven't been used to, allowing ourselves to respond, discovering new faculty of perceiving beauty, can be a way to exercise these new eyes. And it's a way that really Sangha quite emphasizes. He emphasizes that we've got really well-developed arts in our culture. They're a way for us to experience something higher, and we shouldn't ignore them. They're very much part of what we call the distinctive emphasis of Triratna. But so these are ways, what I've been talking about, are ways that we get glimpses of the beauty of reality as it's expressed, as it shows itself in the outer world of matter, through nature, through art, and so on. But we can also use these new eyes to get glimpses of reality in a more direct way that is actually much more difficult to talk about. And I found it quite difficult to write about. So we can do that in meditation, in deep reflection, in response to outer beauty, or at almost any time when our mind is relaxed, not running in its usual ruts, not in prapancha, not in mental proliferation, so that our new eyes are really open, even if only for a little while. When that happens, we may sometimes get a glimpse of something. I can only describe it as beyond. something, I can only describe it as higher. You can't put a name to it. It's beyond the realm of words, as the Buddha said. We might get a glimpse of that. Now, it's not enlightenment. We may get a glimpse of it. We may experience that in all sorts of ways as great beauty, a sense of connectedness to other people, to other beings, to the world around us, a strong sense that we're not separate, that we're part of something. So I could tell you about some of my own experiences of that sort. That's usually very boring when people do that. Some of them involve meditation. Some seem to come spontaneously. One quite important one quite long ago involved certain substances, so I'm just not going to talk about them. I'm not going to go there. But many people have experiences of this sort. They can leave a powerful imprint, but in a sense, they're only the start. They can give us pointers as to how we need to live, but on their own, they usually don't change us that much at any deep level. Our new eyes open for a moment, we get a glimpse of something, and then they close. If we don't feel we've ever had anything like the sort of experiences that I'm talking about, that really does not matter. More important is something that's very difficult to describe, which is a sense, a really vague sense of something beautiful and infinitely attractive that we long for, but which we experience as all sorts of different ways, maybe a bright blur, or a felt sense in the body, or a sense of lack, a sense of divine discontent. We can't define it, but it can include a longing for a new self, a longing for a different sort of world, a sense that we don't really belong here, that we belong in a different sort of world, a longing for a deeper sense of community or even communion with others, so that to some extent our separateness dissolves and we become part of each other. And we become part of something very beautiful that transcends us all. And all of that is incredibly difficult to describe. And you may not experience it in anything like the way that I've just been talking about. But it's really important. I think we have to accept that most of the time, the new eyes I've been talking about are only open a tiny slit at best. So as we go through our day, as we go through our normal daily life, and this very indistinct but very attractive bright blur that I've talked about far off in the distance is the closest we get most of the time to seeing through these new eyes and to seeing the beauty of reality. But we should value this glimpse and allow it to guide how we live. Sangha calls this glimpse, this felt sense, this thing that you can't describe, he calls it the response of what is ultimate in us to what is ultimate in the universe. It is our response to a reality that our new eyes very, very dimly perceive. It is reality calling it towards us, towards it. It's the self we could become calling us towards our future potential. We may experience it in a host of different ways. And the way I've been talking about it may mean very little to you, but you have experienced it. We all do experience it in some way, because it's the reason we're all here. It's what's drawn us to the Dharma. It's what's still drawing us towards something else. So this indefinable sense of something calling to us, something beyond calling to us, is a bit like a light shining from a higher realm that illuminates our realm. Or to change the metaphor, it's like a clear spring of clear, refreshing water. So if we're out of touch with the beauty of reality, if we're out of touch with any sense of meaning, higher meaning, if we're seeing the world just through our worldly eyes, our life becomes like a neglected garden suffering a drought. Cue picture. Our life becomes like a neglected garden suffering a drought. Everything seems a bit dull and dusty and wilted. The lawns are brown and the flowers are droopy and losing their petals. But this connection to reality connecting with the beauty of reality we can get from our new eyes, that we can get from this love of virtue, this love of the beauty of reality, changing our metaphor frantically. It can be like, dim as this connection is, it can be like a spring of water that can transform our whole life. Ta-da! This is me trying to play with audio visuals here. Yeah, it's like a spring of water that can transform our life. Making the flowers bloom and the fruits ripen. So it can turn our life into a beautiful garden full of flowers and fruits. Cue. Next picture, please. Well, that all went well. We live and learn. So all too often our life is like a droughted garden. This connection with the higher, this love of the higher, love of virtue, love of the beauty of reality can be like a spring which can turn our life into a beautiful garden full of beautiful flowers and beautiful fruits. Enough of that. But only if we build the irrigation channels to carry this water to all the different parts of our life, so that they're refreshed and revivified and transformed. And how we do that is what the rest of this series is about. So stay tuned. Thank you.